The Black Sabbath lead singer Ozzy Osbourne has died at the age of 70.
For decades, Sharon Osbourne stood beside the Prince of Darkness. But behind the gothic chaos and heavy metal legacy, something deeply personal was unfolding. At 72, Sharon has finally broken her silence about Ozzy's final days, revealing details no one expected. What role did love, betrayal, and control play in his death? In this video, we'll reveal the untold story of Ozzy's final chapter, how he died, who made the decisions, and the family structure that held it all together. Expect raw truths, legal twists, and a hauntingly poetic farewell curated by the one woman who knew Ozzy best. Ozzy Osbourne's death didn't come out of nowhere, not for his family, and certainly not for Sharon Osbourne. Though the official announcement came on July 22 and was met with shock from the world, those closest to him had been preparing for months. Behind the curtain of rock iconography and public silence, a private, calculated structure had been built, layer by layer, by the one person who had orchestrated every major chapter of his life, Sharon. And it wasn't a structure built around fear. It was built around control. The final cause of death was respiratory failure due to complications from late-stage Parkinson's disease. But even that diagnosis had been managed internally. Ozzy had been declining for years, with Parkinsonian tremors first discussed publicly in the late 2010s. By 2025, the disease had progressed to a stage where speech was lost, motor function had nearly vanished, and the need for round-the-clock medical support became non-negotiable. Sharon responded by creating what can only be described as a private medical fortress, a comprehensive, legally protected care model operated within their Buckinghamshire home. Everything was handled to perfection. Months prior to Ozzy's death, Sharon orchestrated his medical transition with 3 alternating medical teams, one for neurological support, one for motor rehabilitation, and one for palliative care. These were not part-time consultants, these were seasoned professionals, many of whom had to sign ironclad confidentiality contracts, hired as full-time high-level private specialists. Their documentation, verified through legal representation, describes a schedule for operation that looks quite similar to one adopted in an inpatient setting of a hospital's critical care unit. However, the regimen was applied entirely in the home. Family meetings commenced in early July. There were no leaks, no rumors, and certainly no hasty panic on the part of the family. This was deliberate, an execution of a plan already set and approved. Sharon's sole focus was to take Ozzy out of the public eye for the eventuality of his passing and to honor his wishes for complete privacy. The press was shut out. Sharon turned down all press inquiries 72 hours before the official statement and barred even longtime collaborators and friends from the press. Everything was handled through the attorneys, nothing got out from the family until Sharon signed off on it. While this poetic statement of a passing, already tempered with an initial shock, he died at home, in peace, with his family, did not capture the vast machine working quietly behind the scenes. Sharon had transformed their home into a fully functional hospice with digital monitoring for health, estate readiness infrastructure, funeral arrangements coordination, etc. The family's legal filings reveal that even the site of his final repose, a private family burial plot, was secured and prepared quite some time ago, without members of the press or the public ever knowing. But the most intimate detail came from a semi-public comment made by Jack Osbourne. 3 days before his death, Ozzy, words failing him, had a final video call with his children, bidding his goodbye through eye contact and expressions. It wasn't dramatic, but it was thought out. He knew. While all 3 children were there for that last connection, only Sharon was asked to be with him in his final hours. Sharon stated in a personal note attached to the press release, there was no intervention from machines. There was no transfer. Nothing was done outside Ozzy's wishes. Medically speaking, it sounds simple, but that statement weighed heavily on the legal and emotional side. It confirmed the decisions made in his final days were not medical emergencies or last-minute calls. They were acts of intention. Ozzy's death was not impetuous. It was not chaotic. It was his selection, planning, and theft. He left the world according to his own terms. Only Sharon Osbourne, with a plan to realize that option, made it happen. But while the public mourned, one final message from Ozzy would flip the narrative on his so-called Mopefest funeral. For most of his life, Ozzy Osbourne was synonymous with chaos, biting off bat heads, screaming into firelit stadiums, and pushing boundaries no other rock frontman dared to cross. But when it came to death, Ozzy's vision was surprisingly lighthearted. Long before illness began to consume his body, he made it clear, he didn't want a funeral soaked in tears. He didn't want speeches or symbols of tragedy. He wanted mischief. He wanted gratitude. And more than anything, he wanted his final send-off to feel alive. In a 2011 column for The Times, a fan asked Ozzy if planning one's own funeral was morbid. His answer was vintage Ozzy: "I honestly don't care what they play at my funeral. They can put on a medley of Justin Bieber, Susan Boyle, and We Are the Diddy Men if it makes em happy." Then came the twist. He added he wanted pranks. Perhaps a knock from inside the coffin. Maybe a video of himself asking his doctor for a second opinion on the diagnosis of death. He didn't want solemnity. He wanted laughter. Because, as he put it, there'll be no harping on the bad times. An extract from the book by the author reflecting his thoughts on Ozzy's philosophy of life. In considering himself, Ozzy lived a life rife with addiction, insanity, arrests, betrayals, fame, and a slow-burning disease that robbed him of mobility and speech. In answer to how he would like to be remembered, he consistently returned to one factor: as one who survived through it all. One who survived to enjoy a grossly extravagant life and say thank you for it. Sharon took Ozzy's wishes to heart. No grand memorial or a televised tribute was held at the appropriate time, no blowing of the trumpet at the gates by press photographers, and no celebrity guests with sunglasses to offer eulogies. Instead, she designed a private service honoring each and every one of Ozzy's final wishes, a farewell instead of a funeral. The site where the ceremony took place was the Osbourne family's private burial ground, a place that Ozzy had himself chosen many years ago, reportedly saying, "It is the only place I want to be." The service was neither live-streamed nor recorded, and it was not open to the public. Family sources say only immediate family members and a small group of long-term care staff attended. A private funeral service was arranged long in advance by Sharon and had down-to-the-last detail confidentiality agreements, with a strict no-media rule. But at the heart, what made this service uniquely Ozzy was the soundtrack. Sharon selected every note of music that was played. But instead of his top hits or chart-topping songs, she picked unreleased recordings Ozzy had been working on during his long recovery from the 2019 accident that had first exposed the world to the slow progression of his Parkinson's. Songs no one had ever heard before, stripped-down recordings, raw, experimental, only for private moments. The last song played at the burial was a reimagined version of "See You on the Other Side," an emotional remix Ozzy requested in 2023. It was his way of saying goodbye, not through the spectacle, but through sound, whispered instead of screamed. And while fans across the world mourned the passing of the Prince of Darkness, Sharon had fulfilled her last promise. She never made the day of his farewell a museum piece. It was a curated celebration of private meaning, with no public exhibition whatsoever. It was all without any filters for Ozzy in death, as he had striven for in life. Yet amid the precise timing and private nature of the ceremony, murmurs among the fans and the press cast a shadow of uncertainty. Did that look less like a natural passing? Were there quiet hands aiding Ozzy's farewell, as all the gossip had it? But one detail cast a chilling shadow over his joyful goodbye: a long-whispered pact, and Sharon's controversial beliefs about death. The origin of the rumor traces back to 2007, when Sharon Osbourne openly discussed assisted taking of one's own life in interviews and in her memoir Survivor, My Story, The Next Chapter. She spoke candidly about watching her father suffer from Alzheimer's, and how that experience had led her and Ozzy to have difficult but honest conversations about end-of-life options. In particular, she revealed that they had agreed to seek help from Dignitas, a Swiss organization that supports assisted death under specific medical conditions. "If Ozzy or I ever got Alzheimer's," she said at the time, "that's it, we'd be off." The quote made headlines. Some interpreted it as a hypothetical scenario, others took it literally. During that time, Ozzy himself did not confirm or deny the specifics, but he often echoed a similar tone in interviews, witty, macabre, and laced with self-awareness. But after his diagnosis of Parkinson's in 2019, the speculation attached all the more weight. Fast forward to July 2025. Ozzy disappears. He dies at home, completely lucid but unable to speak, with family around him, in a funeral planned to the smallest detail. There were no hospital interventions, emergency transfers, or publicly released medical documentation. Everything was managed under the legally binding advanced care plan signed by Ozzy and coordinated by Sharon. The old rumors were soon dusted off again, with a vengeful twist this time. The '07 quotes were dug up by the media, coupled with the latest audio from the Osbournes podcast, as the topic was raised once again by the pair in October of 2023. In that program, Jack asked his mother if the plan to fly to Switzerland is still a plan. Sharon didn't back down. "Do you think we're going to suffer?" she replied to Jack's inquiry. Jack laughed nervously and responded, "Well, maybe. Isn't life already suffering?" Sharon's answer was blunt: "Mental suffering is enough pain without physical. So, if you've got mental and physical, see ya." This seemed to be encased by a great deal of dark humor, but still had the implication lying deep under it. Fans have speculated on the possibility that Ozzy did not meet entirely natural ends at the end. Did the family go through with it? Was the end medically assisted, discreetly executed under UK laws, or even abroad? Kelly Osbourne wasted no time squashing the speculation. 11 days before Ozzy's death, she posted on Instagram slamming the viral narratives as "my mom said" to get attention one time, insisting her father was not dying at the time and that alleged pact had no legal reality. Yet, in the days that followed, her post raised the fog further. It was hardly true. So why secrecy? Such total control? Why way closure to all press access? What is undeniable, however, is service. Sharon Osbourne possessed total authority, legally, legitimately, in itself. She had power of attorney, managed every treatment, and was in charge of every step of the end-of-life plan. Whether that included formal assisted death procedures, the family neither confirmed nor denied. The case adds heat to the narrative about whether the so-called pact was real, exaggerated, or misunderstood. It has now turned to mythology surrounding the death of Ozzy, actually the final mystery synonymous with the man who made a career wallowing in darkness. Sharon's ability to manage Ozzy's last chapter wasn't born from grief, it was the result of a decades-long power structure she built, piece by piece, behind the scenes. By the time Ozzy Osbourne reached the final years of his life, the chaos that once defined his persona had been replaced with a quiet and calculated order. But that order didn't come from chance or surrender, it came from Sharon Osbourne. She wasn't just his wife. She wasn't just his manager. She was the architect of a full-scale system that monitored, protected, and ultimately preserved everything from his health to his legacy. From the outside, it looked like devotion. From the inside, it was closer to a fortress, with Sharon as its master operator. This system wasn't created in a moment of crisis. It evolved over decades. Sharon had always been the nucleus of Ozzy's life, from his post-Black Sabbath solo career to his reinvention as a television personality. But once his health began to deteriorate, her role transformed from coordinator to controller. When signs of central nervous system decline appeared in the 2010s and Parkinson's was formally diagnosed in 2019, Sharon began putting an entirely new operational model into place, one that resembled the infrastructure of a high-security agency more than that of a celebrity household. Then came the medical protocols. Within the main house, a tripartite tiered structure for care was established that included a team for neurological support, one for motor rehabilitation, and the third for symptomatic treatment. All these units worked on a rotating shift basis. None of them were obtained through any national health system. Sharon avoided getting into any public channel and sourced qualified providers only from private sources. The level of control proved so strict that even meals, sleep, and physical activity were reported under coded systems. Every shift ended with written logs converted on encrypted systems, reviewed weekly by a personal advisory board for quality control. All public appearances would stop unless authorized as such by Sharon herself. Even during rare public appearances by Ozzy, they would only be sanctioned if the internal criteria of being able to sit still, maintain speech stability, and show minimal facial control were met. These weren't superficial demands, they were all precautions for the sake of both dignity and the family's tightly controlled public image. Pre-cleared media presence, medically prepped event rooms, and caregivers always within arm's reach. The iron grip of Sharon did not stop at health. Finances, media rights, and even social interaction were firmly in her control. From at least 3 legal entities, a touring company, a music licensing agency, and a personal branding company, she held authority over all income streams. Budget models were continuously updated every year according to projected health conditions and costs for treatment. Contracts usually cited her as a co-owner or legal representative. No activity that had to do with the convenience of Ozzy's name occurred without that person's signature. Also, legal insulation. Sharon gets advanced power of attorney very early in the decline, allowing her total medical decision-making on her own, even against every group consensus. Just next of kin, she is also the last authority. This setup ensures that the media, medical boards, and even extended family do not interfere. She has access, oversight, and permission to act on Ozzy's behalf. The children had different roles as well under this setup. Kelly Osbourne presided over the communications with social media and the family. Jack covered the legal and digital asset safeguarding. Amy, always more private, will only show up when called. Isn't that such an emotional division? Is it functional? Each is assigned a role. And the role falls under a plan. Sharon has done what very few could achieve. The legacy of the man known for complete chaos moves like a clock. Nothing leaked, nothing was busted. There were no scandals, no intrusive paparazzi shots, and no public unraveling. The fortress held. And, at the end, this provided Ozzy with exactly what he wanted, most of it: peace, privacy, and control. But even total control couldn't shield their relationship from the biggest test of all: betrayal and near collapse. The affair that nearly ended everything. Before Sharon Osbourne could build the fortress that protected Ozzy in his final years, she had to rebuild something far more fragile: their marriage. For a couple whose lives had survived the weight of fame, addiction, and public scrutiny, it wasn't Ozzy's health that nearly tore them apart. It was infidelity. And when the affair was exposed, everything, personal and professional, almost collapsed in a matter of days. In 2016, the media broke the story: Ozzy Osbourne had engaged in an extramarital relationship with a hairstylist. Sharon, after decades of managing not only Ozzy's career but his volatility, was blindsided. She publicly confirmed the affair and almost immediately stepped away from him. For the first time in their marriage, she wasn't defending Ozzy, she was demanding distance. She stripped him of his scheduled performances, cancelled all appearances, and called their marriage what it was in that moment: broken. However, internally, there were far more complications. Ozzy underwent voluntary treatment for what were considered compulsive sexual urges, but many felt this term was a very sanitary appraisal of something much more rooted in control and impulse. Following Sharon's lead, a full evaluation process was set in motion, not just medical but legal. Documentary materials and correspondence emanating from the family showed that this period became a full-scale re-evaluation of the rules of engagement within the relationship. Never seen before, the results. New legal documents were formed very much like contracts. Ozzy was to maintain boundaries where truly personal relationships were outside his marriage, submit himself to third-party scrutiny financially, and keep away from public appearances unapproved in advance. These were not just boundaries, contract-like ones with terms of reference, penalties, and monitors. Sharon was making it known: either the marriage moved forward under her terms or not. Spontaneity would now be replaced with structure. The children played a rather significant role in the reconciliation, logistically rather than emotionally. Jack and Kelly Osbourne worked out a kind of co-care plan in which visits would be interchangeable for their father with respect to appointments, family duties, and media filtration. Jack took charge of privacy protocol and all legal interfaces. Kelly had much experience through having weathered much of the public narratives, so she took control of family messaging on the social platforms. Amy kept her place of silent but steady witness, participating only when it involved private planning. The aim was not to reform the marriage, as marriage is so traditionally understood. No grand loving gestures or televised reconciliations marked this union. As she herself termed it, Sharon said the process was one of re-establishment of structure. The marriage wasn't healed, it was reorganized. At each stage, all of the relational restoration was signed, documented, and reviewed. Life together became more precise than passion. After the complete internal agreement was signed, Sharon once again took the helm of Ozzy's career. Since then, Sharon has gained medically coordinating rights, financial management, and authority over vetoing media appearances. Even her personal saying would take a back seat. She retracts on all public-facing work, cancels the event appearance, and sinks wholly into reconstructing the system that once made them one of rock's strongest, unpredictable duos. This is not recovery at all, it is reset. What was trust has been replaced by a more varied form of loyalty. Forgiveness was not understood by Sharon. Rather, it was using control. And Ozzy had had to conform because of the conditions he was beginning to show of his degenerative illness. He surrendered his havoc for peace. The man, previously controlled by wild urges, now operated under the most rigidly administered timetable of his entire existence. Such a deep-going, deeply personal transformation has profound ramifications. It left Sharon able to control everything about his health, finances, and reputation for years leading to his death. Without this collapse and the brutal rebuilding which has followed, that fortress could not have existed. When Ozzy's voice was gone and only his eyes remained, none of that structure mattered more than the silence they shared in his final hours. The final hours. By the time July 22 arrived, the end was not a surprise, but it still struck like thunder. Ozzy Osbourne had been fading, quietly, for weeks. His mobility had deteriorated. His speech was gone. Even his facial muscles, once animated with mischief and wild-eyed defiance, were reduced to slight movements. But one thing remained unbroken: his awareness. According to his family, Ozzy was fully conscious during his final hours. And that alone gave his goodbye a weight no performance ever could. In the 3 days leading up to his death, a final video call was arranged. It wasn't a spontaneous moment. It was scheduled, medically approved, and designed to be safe. On the screen were his children, Jack, Kelly, and Amy. Ozzy couldn't speak. Parkinson's had claimed his voice. But through slight movements of the eyes, subtle shifts in his face, and prolonged focus, he said what needed to be said. Jack Osbourne later confirmed, there was nothing ambiguous about the moment. Everyone understood the meaning of the farewell. Some of the most powerful images are the simple ones: a man, who had spent most of his life howling into microphones, standing still, focusing on eye contact. But there was power in that silence. For the past several decades, Ozzy had battled substance abuse, chaos, controversy, and inner demons. In the last instant, he opted for clarity. Stillness. Most importantly, presence. She was the only one given access to her husband in his dying hours, Sharon Osbourne. It was a premeditated decision that stayed private until after the death. No clergy, no doctor, and no other outside visitor. Sharon went into the room to be with him, not as a manager or executor of his estate, but as the one person he wanted to be faithful and loyal to in the end. According to the family's official statement, when Ozzy died, he did so without any machines, tubes, or hospital monitors. Just peace and someone he trusted. In the letter made public after the funeral last Wednesday, Sharon wrote, "He and I kept our old promises. There was no intervention from machines. There was no transfer. Nothing was done outside of Ozzy's wishes." Those lines were not just poetic but also legally significant. They confirmed that the death of Ozzy was wholly contingent on an advanced medical directive. That every decision, from pain management to physical setting, had been prearranged when Ozzy was still able to sign documents. Sharon created a seamless conclusion. The body lay in the private room for the instructed 12 hours before being taken to a predetermined burial site. Years back, a funeral team was retained. They were bound by confidentiality agreements and strict operating procedures. No pictures leaked out. There was no paparazzi at the gate. Even longtime industry pals were never let in on the timing. The room where Ozzy died had no candles, there were no religious decorations. It was, in the words of one caregiver who worked under Sharon's employment contract, simple, cool, and quiet. An ambient-sounding playlist was playing in the background, very low. Many of those songs were unreleased recordings of Ozzy during the lockdown, songs he never shared with the outside world, songs meant for just such private moments. Not the end of a rock legend. The closing of a chapter in a very human life, which had been stripped down to its essence, dignity, control, and love. Sharon constructed the wall around him, shielded him from the noise, and executed every last wish in perfect timing. Ozzy's final exit wasn't marked by theatrics, but the legacy he left behind was protected by one last layer of Sharon's control. Ozzy Osbourne's death may have marked the end of a life, but it also initiated the beginning of something far more complex, the management of a legacy. And in true Osbourne fashion, it wasn't left to fate, infighting, or entertainment executives. It was locked down, prepped, protected, and placed directly into Sharon Osbourne's hands. His final gift to her wasn't money or music. It was authority. Full, uncontested authority over everything he left behind. Even before Ozzy's passing, Sharon had been the undisputed controller of his professional life. Every album, every licensing agreement, every brand appearance had passed through her. But what she did after his death went beyond business, it was strategic preservation. The Osbourne family issued no public list of heirs, no press conference about his artistic archive, and no announcement about the future of his name. What came instead was a brief but highly structured legal breakdown that made one thing clear: this legacy would remain internal, and it would remain intact. First, the will. According to legal representatives as well as verified documents, Ozzy's estate had already, even before his death, been placed into a closed family management system protected from external negotiations and disputed claims. Sharon had complete powers of administration. Rather than equal inheritance to heirs, however, Ozzy's legacy was apportioned by role, function, not favor. All public messaging and media consultation rights were handed over to Kelly Osbourne for her media relations experience. Digital assets, from unreleased concert footage to archival recordings and secured IP, were under Jack Osbourne, who had worked behind the scenes for years in production and digital logistics. Amy, the most private of the siblings, was privy to the non-commercial music library of the family, demos, handwritten lyrics, and unreleased personal recordings that Ozzy made for himself, not fans. But the centerpiece, the catalog, all licensing rights, imaging, and branding controls, belongs entirely to Sharon. She was given the power to approve or deny anyone access to Ozzy's name, image, music, or likeness. No tribute tours, no documentaries, and no merchandising deals without her approval. And that control was exercised immediately. As soon as proposals came in from those interested in plans for a posthumous project, such as setting up a foundation in his name or creating a memorial concert to honor him, they were completely rebuffed by Sharon. In a written postscript to the family's legal filing, she said that no external agencies would get to profit from or repackage the legacy of Ozzy. Any awards would be symbolic, not commercial. This wasn't just about keeping control, it was protecting purity. Sharon didn't want Ozzy's life to be a brand hijacked by someone else, that would be the least she would allow. His image deserved something better than a licensing template. Sharon preserved the essence of a man who lived, fell, stood back up, and got on his own terms. Step out was perhaps the most significant feature of this final arrangement. After years of running the Osbourne empire, she formally resigned as manager of the brand. No media tours. No books. No behind-the-scenes specials. On the legal documents, her task was concluded with a single signature, the acknowledgement that all duties respecting Ozzy's assets, medical affairs, and posthumous directives had been dealt with. There was no fanfare, just finality. To those closest to her, it was a quiet but monumental shift, the end of an era. After decades of steering every detail, she chose peace over control, and silence over spectacle. If you found this story powerful, subscribe to the channel. Hit like, share it with someone who remembers the Prince of Darkness, and comment your thoughts below. Because sometimes, the loudest lives end in the quietest ways. And Sharon Osbourne just made sure his final performance was exactly as he wanted.